Today, I'm talking about the past, the present, and the future of the Israel-Palestine conflict with historian Benny Morris. As a former professor of the Middle East studies, Benny is one of the most well-known people in this space. I think there's three main questions that we'll go into today. I think that can really define where you should stand on this war. Number one, the history. Going back historically, who does the land of Israel belong to? Number two, what does the organization of Hamas represent? Are they an organization that you can actually work with for peace, or are they something that you need to wipe out? And number three, which we need to go to as well, is does Israel oppress Gaza? So I think those are all points we need to talk about. I'd love to talk about the first one, which is going back into history. Who does the land of Israel belong to?
Well, that's a tough question. If you're asking me, I would say both peoples have a claim to the land, both the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Israelis have a claim to the land because Jews lived in the country and periodically governed the country for over 1,000 years between 1200, say, BC and the first century AD. And then over the thousands of years in which Jews were exiled from the land of Israel, which is today called by most people Palestine, they longed to return to that country in which they had lived, in which Judaism and the Jewish people, in fact, were galvanized and formed. So there's a strong historical connection and claim to the land of Israel by the Jews. The Palestinians have a claim because Arabs have lived in the country since they conquered the country in the 7th century and then began to settle in the country and to convert the population in the 7th century and later, which was largely Jewish or pagan or Christian. They began to convert people and they became Muslims. And so in some way, Arabs have lived here, though never governing the country, since the 7th century AD. And in the past few hundred years, the majority of the population of Israel, the land of Israel-Palestine, was Arab. So in that sense, they're an indigenous people, even though, as I say, they conquered and came from somewhere else. They came from Arabia and conquered the land in the 7th century. But since then, they have more or less continuously lived here, even though not governing it, because it was governed by Mamluks, by Turks, by others, usually not by Arabs, certainly not after the 13th, 14th century.
So to now, do Arabs have a claim of the land?
Yes, I think they do, because they and their fathers and grandfathers and great-grandparents, by and large, lived here, and they would like to stay here, and they became politically conscious, the Arabs in Palestine, from the 1920s on, growingly became politically conscious, identified eventually as what is called Palestinians, and have a claim to rule the land in which they live.
Okay, so that brings us really to where we are today.
Well, it brings us to a conflict between two peoples who have claims, and I believe in some way rightful claims to the land, and they are in conflict over the who will be sovereign in the land.
Okay, so we've got the answer to that question. Let's go to the second question, which is what do Hamas stand for as an organization? So if you look at that...
I can answer that very simply. Hamas is a despicable organization. It is an Islamist, fundamentalist Islamic organization which puts in its founding charter from 1988 the destruction of Israel as a major aim. The second aim is to turn the land into an Arab-ruled land run along Sharia, that is, along Islamic religious rules. And it's also anti-Semitic. It basically doesn't want Jews to live here, and it sort of implies it would like to destroy the Jews in the land of Israel and perhaps even outside it, but certainly to get rid of them from Israel-Palestine. It's homophobic, it's misogynistic, it's anti-democratic, it's anti-Jewish, anti-Christian. Almost on every count, it's a despicable organization.
So some people might say is that, okay, it said in the Hamas in the founding charter in 1988, as you said, that they promoting the murder of Jews, but since then they've changed it. Does that make a difference to you, or you don't think it makes?
No, they haven't changed it. This is a sleight of hand, a trick by the Hamas. The founding charter from 1988, put together mainly by its founder Yassin, the Sheikh Yassin, remains the charter, the covenant of the organization. In 2017, seeing that this wasn't particularly appealing to Western minds and ears, they issued a sort of interpretation of the charter, which downgraded its very negative parts. But the charter remains the foundation stone and program of the organization to destroy the Jewish state, to expel or kill the Jews who live in it, and to turn the land into a Palestinian Arab polity run on extreme religious rules.
So what do they use that? You said this. They've got the original version, and then they've got the second version, which is more down.
There's no second version. It's an interpretation. It's not a second covenant. There is one. It's like the American Constitution.
Yeah.
There are amendments to the Constitution, but the Constitution is the basic document which characterizes and should set the rules for the country. Afterwards, you can write interpretations of the document, and that's what supposedly the Hamas did in order to soften its impact in the West, because it sounds anti-Semitic and anti-democratic and misogynistic and anti-Christian, etc., etc. But the foundational document, which remains the constitution of the organization, is the 1988 Covenant.
So because of that, you're saying that they still want to kill all the Jews. Is there?
I didn't say kill all the Jews.
Not kill all the Jews.
It's anti-Semitic and would like to kill Jews.
Yeah.
And wants certainly to rid the country, Israel, of its Jews. Yes.
Is that what it says in the charter, that they want to get rid of the Jews from the country?
Basically, it says that. Yes.
So, are you saying
there's a sentence there which they quote from one of the hadiths, which says, it calls on stones and rocks behind which Jews hide from avenging or attacking Muslims. Please come here and take care of or kill the Jew who is hiding behind me. This, by implication, means all Jews should be killed. That's what the implication is. So it doesn't say explicitly kill all the Jews.
Do you see Hamas as an existential threat to the state of Israel? It's either us or them.
No, it's not an existential threat. That's absurd. It's an organization with 20 or 30,000 armed gunmen. Today, far less, because we probably killed at least 10,000 of them in the past 4 or 5 months. So it's not an existential threat, but it's part of an existential threat, because the Hamas is a branch in one way, or a tentacle of the Islamist bear hug, if you like, run from Tehran, from Iran. Iran has its regime has always and repeatedly said it wants to destroy Israel, and it has managed to mobilize proxies around Israel: the Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis in the south, the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It has mobilized these proxies in a sort of an attempt to strangle the Jewish state. And at the moment, 3 of these proxies are active against Israel. Hamas by itself is incapable. It's too small an organization, too weak an organization, though it's very good in defense because it's prepared the Gaza Strip to defend itself quite well, but it's incapable of destroying Israel. But as we saw on October 7th, they are able to send thousands of their troops across the border and killed 1,200 Israelis on that day. So it can harm Israel. And alongside the other Iranian proxies and Iran itself, which is busy trying to achieve nuclear weaponry, it is a part of a general existential threat to Israel, yes. But essentially, Tehran is the main proponent and the main source of the problem. As I said, it is trying to build atomic weapons, to probably achieve a stock of atomic weapons, and then it will definitely be an existential threat to Israel, especially with the aid of various proxies around Israel's borders.
So if Israel are going into Gaza now and saying, listen, we need to actually make sure that Hamas doesn't have a threat of Israel anymore, is there an argument to say that Israel should go into Iran and actually stop the larger threat?
I have been writing occasionally articles over the past 15 years, I think, saying that Israel should, if America won't do the job, Israel should destroy the Iranian nuclear installations and the Iranian potential to build atomic weapons. I've written that frequently. Unfortunately, our leader for the past 15 years has been an incompetent and weak-kneed leader called Benjamin Netanyahu, who's incapable of taking strong decisions and hasn't dealt with the Iranian nuclear project as it should have been dealt with until now. And over the years, they've come closer and closer to achieving nuclear weaponry. And Netanyahu, while doing some clandestine, made some clandestine efforts to kill Iranian scientists or blow up occasional installations in Iran using secret agents, but the only way apparently of stopping Iran from achieving nuclear weapons is to destroy their whole their nuclear installations and the whole system of enriching plutonium, enriching uranium, building missiles and so on, all of which together will eventually amount to an Iranian nuclear state. And that Israel cannot allow, because it will be under perpetual existential threat from Tehran.
So how would Israel do that? And do you think they're most likely to use it on Israel?
I don't know. The question is, lots of things here are variables which are unknown. I don't know, for example, what Israel's aerial and naval capabilities are versus the Iranian defensive systems against these things. So I don't know how capable Israel is today of destroying the nuclear installations in Iran by itself. America certainly has that capability. Israel might have that capability, but I don't know if it does. It has a leader who's incapable of taking action or making a serious decision on this score. There is also, of course, always the possibility of Israel using non-conventional weapons to destroy the Iranian nuclear project. And Israel may in the end up doing this if the conventional weaponry is insufficient to stop the Iranian march to the bomb.
So you mentioned the nuclear bomb, but isn't that just nuclear capability? But that's just one part of the larger problem. The larger problem, isn't it, that Iraq, not just nuclear, because that of course makes the threat much worse, but actually the whole hatred against Israel isn't that much further than just nuclear is just one part of it again.
Yeah, look, the nuclear threat is the spear point. That's the most dangerous thing. If activated against Israel, atomic bombs, Israel will not exist. It will cease to exist. Israel is a small country. One of the Iranian leaders, I think Rafsanjani once said, a former president of Iran said, Israel is a one-bomb state. In other words, you drop a bomb on Tel Aviv, that's what he meant, a nuclear bomb on Tel Aviv, and Israel will cease functioning or cease to exist. So that's obviously the main threat. It's true that Iran has demonstrated that there is another threat, which is this, octopus-like tentacles using proxies, which are trying to strangle Israel from all directions using conventional weapons. The Houthis by attacks on shipping to Israel, the Hamas by invading southern Israel, the Hezbollah by shelling Israel's northern settlements, and so on. But these aren't existential threats unless they continue to be activated in concert over a long period of time. This could eventually, one can think, maybe do some mortal damage to Israel. But the real threat is the nuclear weapons behind all of this. And these are possessed by Iran.
Okay, so that's okay. We'll answer that question. We'll go to the third question, which is Israel and Egypt. Israel and Egypt have a blockade over Gaza where they control the sea air, which I don't think they let anything come in at all. They control all three entries and exits, which Egypt control one, Israel control two. Does this limit Gaza's economy, and can Gaza grow under this whilst this is still happening?
Well, in the past, you're right. Israel has controlled the airspace over Gaza, the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the coast of Gaza, and most of the border crossings, potentially land crossings to Gaza, except for the Rafah crossing, which is controlled by Egypt. So Israel, in some way, has been besieging Gaza. Israel, incidentally, also supplied Gaza over the last decades with the fuel necessary to run the generators and the power plant in Gaza. It supplied it with electricity. Its water system is dependent on Israel. All of these things are true. And in this sense, Israel was besieging Gaza. But the reason Israel was besieging Gaza is that Gaza was a base used by the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad for rocketing southern Israel. This has been going on since the late 1990s and increased after the Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. The rocketing of southern Israel and even major cities in Israel has been going on for the past almost 15 years. So this forced Israel to constrict and restrict access to Gaza, access of materials to Gaza, etc. And following this invasion of October the 7th last year, the siege will be tightened, has been tightened, and Israel is virtually occupying most of the Gaza Strip physically with its army at the moment. What will happen afterwards, nobody knows. Will Israel withdraw from the Gaza Strip? Will it manage to destroy the Hamas, as Netanyahu says he wants to, and most Israelis want him to do, want the army to manage? I don't know if this is going to happen or how quickly it's going to happen. Israel may stay in occupation of Gaza for the coming years, for all I know, because seems to be no alternative for an Israeli army occupation if you don't want the Hamas to resuscitate and arise again, posing a potential threat to Israel.
Okay, so you said that they need to stay there to make sure this doesn't come up again. So the question is, if
I didn't say that. I said at the moment, given no other alternative, it seems
right.
that
So
Israel will stay there. If there is an alternative, the Fatah or the PLO or the Palestinian Authority or the Emiratis or the Saudis, somebody taking care of security in Gaza, preventing the rise again of the Hamas, maybe somebody else can do it. At the moment, it doesn't look like there is such an option on the horizon.
So if there's no alternative, then Israel will have to stay there. But won't that just create more well, actually, let's take a step back. Is Israel able to get rid of Hamas, or is it an ideology which can spread and just never stop growing?
Well, Islamic fundamentalism is an ideology with various offshoots or practical offshoots: ISIS, ISIL, Hamas, Hezbollah. There are Islamic fundamentalists everywhere, and you don't kill them by killing the actual preachers or the military leaders, etc. The ideology is there to remain, and I assume many people in Gaza, perhaps most, are Islamic fundamentalists and would like to see Israel die. But that in itself is not sufficient as a threat to Israel or to its existence. It's possible that Israel will be able to destroy the Hamas as a military and governmental organization. That seems to be the aim of the Israeli military invasion or counteroffensive against Gaza. I don't know how close we are to it, and it may depend on whether Israel is able and allowed to take care of the remnants of the Hamas in the southern part of Gaza, in Rafah. At the moment, Rafah is under Hamas control. Israel has managed to occupy and destroy the Hamas in most areas of Gaza, but so long as the Hamas remains effective in the south of the Gaza Strip, I don't know whether Israel will be able to accomplish the job, again, without going into Rafah. But going into Rafah involves the problem of 1.5 million refugees who have inundated the town, most of them from the north of the Gaza Strip. So the possibility of taking over the Rafah area, southern Gaza, is problematic. This is the problem. And Western powers have tried to curb Israel's intentions and perhaps even ability to take Rafah at the moment.
Do you think Israel should go into Rafah?
Do you think what?
Do you think Israel should go into Rafah?
I believe Israel should try to destroy Hamas totally, and I think if it's capable of doing it and going into Rafah without killing a large number of civilians, Israel must give it a shot. But this partly depends on America's attitude and then the attitude of the European community.
But that seems quite negative towards that.
Yeah, but it depends how negative. You can make noises against it, but you can also, for example, halt munitions to Israel. So far, America has given Israel apparently all the munitions it has requested. If there is an embargo on military supplies to Israel, this might affect Israel's decision-making with regard to taking over Rafah. If this doesn't happen, if there is no munitions embargo or military embargo on Israel, basically it means that America will give Israel a free hand in Rafah so long as we don't kill large numbers of civilians. This depends on will we be able to move this 1.5 million civilians out of Rafah, leaving the place open for Israel to enter and take care of the Hamas battalions which still exist in Rafah.
So let's go back a step. You said if Israel has no other option, you think they should stay in Gaza. So I'm wondering, if Israel do stay in Gaza, could that be indefinitely? Would that be okay?
Most Israelis, myself included, don't want to see that happen, because staying in Gaza means a continuous guerrilla war against Hamas insurgents, many of whom are living in the tunnel system underground across the Gaza Strip. And that's problematic. It'll mean a sort of an urban guerrilla war against the remaining Hamasniks. And don't forget, we may have killed 10 or 15,000 Hamas fighters, but they can probably recruit more. There's lots of 17 and 18 and 20-year-old Arabs in the Gaza Strip who will gladly join the Hamas to replace those who've been killed. And urban warfare doesn't take that much military, know-how. You just have a Kalashnikov and a couple of grenades, and you come out of the tunnel system and you attack a Israeli patrol. And this can go on for years if Israel is in permanent occupation of the Gaza Strip, a type of war of attrition which Israelis don't like and don't want.
Okay, so that's where we're at. So going back to the original question, which was, do Israel oppress Gaza, and if so, does that limit their economic ability? Could Israel? So you said since 1980, or especially since 2007, Israel have put these restrictions around Gaza. Can Gaza actually grow economically under there? Because it's a very poor place right now.
Until 2003, tens of thousands of Gazan inhabitants used to work in Israel. They used to cross the border through Israeli checkpoints and come to Israel for 8 or 10 hours and work here. This was stopped after the Hamas in Gaza and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza began to systematically rocket Israeli settlements around the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip at the moment basically lives on Western charity, that is, aid organizations, and this has been going on for years. It's not just from yesterday or from the October 7th. For in fact decades, Western money, American money, British money, European money in general has been financing the Gaza Strip and keeping people there alive and with medical systems, with schools and so on. Basically through UNRWA. this situation of continuous Western world charity um, seems to me something which must end. But then you have to put Gaza on its feet economically. In other words, building industrial plants, providing power generating plants, water filtration systems, and then the converting salt water into fresh water. All of these things demand basically a peaceful Gaza to come into existence. A port in Gaza, an airfield in Gaza, all of these things could happen, but there has to be peace in and around Gaza. And without that, Gaza will not progress economically. It'll, in fact, sink into a greater and greater dependence on Western charity and a greater and greater poverty, in fact.
Okay, yeah, so that's exactly what I was wondering. I was wondering, okay, Gaza is where they are right now, and it's also basically the only way they're surviving is sponsored by Western charity, where people put money into it, where America, whatever it is. So I was wondering, under this oppression of it, where Israel control their border, where they don't let many imports come in, is there any way Gaza could grow economically? And if they can't, as long as a blockade is there, they're never going to grow, and they're never going to be able to actually. Because isn't the way that to actually to not to de-educate them, but to give them, but to actually make them less radical, is to give them more opportunity, or is it? Do you?
Well,
Yeah.
if they were de-radicalized and agreed to live in peace with Israel, economic opportunity and economic development would follow
But isn't that
in the Gaza Strip.
no?
But so long as
But
so
to
long
get
as the
them,
Hamas
but to get them to de-radicalize, don't you need that first to happen?
it's probably you're probably right. You probably need to change their mindset, their psychology, um, uh, and think in terms of their own welfare rather than destroying Israel. Maybe if that happened, economic development and economic independence of the Gaza Strip would follow. But at the moment, an opinion poll published today, in fact, in the Haaretz, shows that support of the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, among all these poor, devastated people, support for the Hamas has only increased since the 7th of October. And the same, incidentally, among Palestinians in the West Bank. And so long as this is the psychological mindset of the people in Gaza, I don't see a peace or economic development happening in the Gaza Strip.
So it seems a bit like the chicken and the egg situation, where Israel is where they have right now with the blockade over Gaza. Israel is saying we're going to take away all this blockade once we think Gaza is not a threat to Israel anymore. Gaza is very likely only going to have that change of mindset once their blockade is gone, and they're allowed to have economic stability. They're allowed to grow. They're allowed to have not just donations from Western countries, but actually investments, which is where there'll be much more education, real prospects. So it seems like a chicken and egg situation.
Well, there is a chicken and egg situation, but don't forget that Israel didn't blockade. The Gaza Strip wasn't under blockade before the year 2000, certainly not before 2003. There was free movement back and forth. There was investment to some degree in developing the Gaza Strip. They even started to build an airfield there at one point. But once the rocketing of Israel began or increased, the Israeli blockade of the Strip began and then intensified. So it's all related to how much terror, if you like, is projected from the Gaza Strip vis-a-vis Israel. If they stop doing that, there's a possibility of developing the Gaza Strip. Won't turn into paradise, but it can maybe become a normal place. But so long as they attack Israel, Israel will retaliate, and as one saw after October 7th, even reoccupying the Gaza Strip. And that's certainly unhealthy both for us and for the population there. But how you de-radicalize a population, especially a population which has suffered so much at Israel's hands, though Israelis will say also at the hands of the Hamas, how you de-radicalize them, I don't really know.
So that's
the 20 years of American presence and combat in Afghanistan de-radicalize the Afghanis? It didn't. So I don't know how you go about this. The only other examples I can give you are Germany and Japan after World War II. They were de-radicalized, both of them, but they had to suffer so much devastation, millions of dead Germans, hundreds of thousands or millions of Japanese had to die before they changed their mindset and agreed to become liberal Western states. Whether this can happen in the Gaza Strip in the wake of what has happened in the last few months, the Israeli counteroffensive there with thousands of Gazan dead. I'm not sure the numbers are what the Hamas broadcasts, but certainly thousands of Gazans have been killed. I don't know whether this is sufficient to lead them to a de-radicalization.
So that's really the big question, is $1 million question, which is how do we de-radicalize Gaza? Because if Israel is saying that people in Gaza, if Israel is saying the only way we can actually open this and actually let them have imports and have them investments is once we actually once they're de-radicalized, and then but they're still continuing to oppress them. It feels it's never going to end.
Well, I'm not an expert on de-radicalization. I know a little bit about history.
Yeah.
But as I say, tremendous traumas, tremendous tragedies in the past have led to de-radicalization of societies, as I say, like Germany's and Japan's at the end of World War II. Whether this will work or whether this will happen in the Gaza Strip, I don't know. Islamic fundamentalism seems to have a very strong hold on Muslims. In other words, I don't know how you change that.
Okay, so I'll actually go and recap. I asked you 3 questions to see what's the future. So I'll recap the questions you answered. So number 1, historically,
I know something about the past. You're asking me all the time to think about the future, and I don't really know very much about the future.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, I mean, if you look, so going through this 3 questions, you said Israel, what's it called? Israelis and Palestinians still have some sovereignty to the land.
They have a right to the land or claim on the land. Yes.
They have a claim on the land. He said Hamas. We need to get rid of Hamas because they do have a huge threat to Israel. But of course, more largely, we're looking at Tehran and Iran, especially nuclear weapons and nuclear. And number 3, which is about the blockade. He said they need to have the blockade for the safety, but we need to de-radicalize them first. So I see all of this put together. It seems like an almost impossible. I know you said about the future is quite a hard thing to talk about, but is there any solution that you think that could work?
I don't know. I've become pessimistic since the year 2000. I've become a pessimist about the possibility of Israeli-Palestinian peace. Mainly because the Palestinians, and in this the Hamas is a vanguard, the Palestinians have basically refused to accept the legitimacy of the Zionist enterprise and the legitimacy of Israel, and refused basically to make peace with Israel based on a 2-state solution. They want all of Palestine for themselves. The Hamas says so very clearly. The PLO, Fatah, Palestinian Authority says it less clearly, but this is what they have in their hearts. And so long as this is the situation among Palestinians, and this isn't just the Hamas and Gaza, I don't see a possibility of Israeli-Palestinian peace. The West may want a 2-state solution. They may think it's the just solution, as I do, incidentally, theoretically. But so long as the Arabs do not want a 2-state solution, won't agree to it in their hearts, and growingly, incidentally, the Israelis also have become averse to a 2-state solution. There won't be any peace, and I don't see a way out.
Well, we've almost finished on a very negative ending.
I'm sorry to not supply an optimistic ending.
I presume you don't like Bibi Netanyahu's.
I think he's an awful prime minister. He's incompetent. He's a crook. His place actually is in jail. I think this is what the judges will decide. If ever he allows them to reach the end of his trial, that's where he'll end up.
What about his plan for the future of Gaza?
He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't say anything about a plan. When asked, he says, "Well, the IDF will remain there for a while. I know the generals and the soldiers don't want that." But he says, well, I don't have a plan. And when people say, well, maybe the Palestinian Authority can take over, maybe the Emiratis can take over, maybe the Saudis can take care of security in the Strip, he says, well, I don't think so. I mean, I don't see how that's going to happen. He's
Well,
right. I don't
yeah.
see how it's going to happen. In that sense, he's correct.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It wasn't positive, but it's not really a positive conflict. It's a very, very negative conflict, which left tens of thousands of people dead. So thank you for joining.
My pleasure.